The skills for Ashurbanipal were just released in the official in-game forum for Rise of Kingdoms, which means we've got to make a video reviewing these skills in depth. So stick around for all the things you want to know about Ashurbanipal's skills, and I mean, he's looking like Nebu 2.0, which means he's gonna be good. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms. And as soon as the information dropped that these skills were now available, you know that your boy Chisgule is making a video about it, so subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss news and updates about Rise of Kingdoms, because I like to stay on top of that. So let's get started with the skills on this mightiest governor commander, Ashurbanipal, and the active skill deals direct damage to 5 enemy troops in a fan-shaped area, 1500 damage factor. That damage reduces based on the number of targets you hit. Well, 1500 damage factor is not so exciting, but we're not done. Now it also has a direct damage factor of 1000 to the thing you are targeting. So this feels a lot like Nebu 2.0 here. That's basically what he does on his active skill, but way more damage. Let's continue on. Second skill, very easy to understand. 20% attack, 20% defense when you're outside of territory, and 15% march speed when you're outside of territory. It's really funny because just yesterday I was reviewing Saladin and talking about how the developers are very likely going to revive him with a future cavalry commander. That's just a pattern the devs have been following. I covered that in yesterday's video. You should watch that in depth for the whole thing. But Saladin's got 20% attack, 20% defense, 5% march speed, no strings attached. So, like, it's interesting to see that although the power level on commanders has obviously gone way up, this second skill configuration seems to be very standard or modified only very slightly. So you get more boost here than you would on a Saladin, for example, but you do have the stipulation that for the defense and the march speed, you have to be outside of your alliance territory. This is a rally commander, so, like, that's the whole point. You would be outside of territory rallying an enemy. From here, this commander's troop deals 20% more skill damage. And whenever this troop uses an active skill while attacking a city or stronghold, the target deals 20% less normal damage for the next 3 seconds. So I would assume this is a debuff applied to the enemy. That debuff can only be applied once every 5 seconds. Reducing the normal damage is a big deal because it includes smite damage, as we see here. This feels like it is definitely intended to counter Gorgo, which is the way the game works. I mean, you get the counter to something, and then they release the counter to the counter, and then the counter to the counter to the counter. Like, they're constantly releasing the counter to the thing they just released. And that's the way the game works. So that's, I think, what we're seeing here. And what's interesting about this is that, you know, look, that effect is only available, that debuff is only available when you're attacking a city or stronghold. If you're looking at this commander and wondering, do I use him in the field? 20% more skill damage is good, but you know, it's not insane for a skill. Isong has 50% skill damage on a skill. So let's keep going. Chosen of Ashur. This commander's troop takes 15% less normal damage. So, I mean, directly countering Gorgo and Smite meta. If this commander is leading a rally attack, whenever the rallied army deals direct damage, it has a 50% chance to gain a 3% bonus to skill damage dealt for 10 seconds. It can stack up to 10 times, and the duration is reset whenever you gain a new stack, which means, you know, you use an active skill, the duration of the buff goes back to 10 seconds, and you get more stacking skill damage, upwards of 30%. 3% per stack. I don't know why they show skill damage bonus 33333. Like, if it doesn't change, you don't need to list it like that, but, like, you get the idea. For a rally, which is where this applies, this is obviously going to stack up. Dealing direct damage is basically things like the active skill does direct damage. If you look at the 4th skill on Herman, that's an instant proc damage, but it's listed as direct damage. The game lists direct damage. We just don't, like, look at that wording too closely frequently because it often hasn't mattered that it says direct damage or not. But direct damage is the set of things that will give you more stacks of skill damage for this. But, like, for just fielding, it's 15% less normal damage, which, like, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. Let's keep going, though. Omnipotent, the expertise. Now, this is a doozy. Whenever this commander's troop uses an active skill, it gains one of the following buffs for 4 seconds, and this is chosen at random. You either get 30% archer attack, 30% archer health, 30% archer defense, or 20% more normal damage dealt, or 20% more skill damage dealt. And the way that this would work, I assume, is you use the active skill of your primary commander, which triggers this buff. For the next 4 seconds, you'll randomly have one of these buffs. There's a second of downtime, then your secondary commander uses their active skill. Yet again, you would look at this series of buffs and choose one at random. Assuming it is a new buff than the one different from the one you already have active, then you'll have both of them active. And I would assume that if you get the same buff twice, which, there's like a very small chance of that happening, then it would overwrite it and give you a longer duration of that buff. So you'd extend the duration by 2 seconds, which is the worst case scenario. You want to get 2 different buffs. Now remember, there is a way to get extra skill activations, and if you didn't see my Herman Prime video, the dude looks really strong. One of his capabilities is you get extra activations of your active skill, which will trigger Omnipotent all over again. So Ashurbanipal and Herman Prime should be good pairs together based off of that synergy alone. In fact, we can talk about Ashurbanipal Pairs, but there's so many good combos for Ashurbanipal because he's basically better Nebu, and I was already using Nebu, and I would have used Nebu with many different commanders and configurations and been extremely happy, and we can jump in game and talk about that. So again, if we look at what this commander does just from a field perspective, it's 1500 damage factor to 5 targets with an extra 1000 damage factor to your primary target. 20% attack, and when outside of territory, 20% defense and 15 march speed. You get 20% more skill damage in the open field, and 15% less normal attack damage taken. So you can see why I'm equating this to a better Nebu. Nebu also has a rally-related skill. And here it's kind of split across 2 skills that are halfway for rallying only. On Nebu, it's 1 skill that's fully committed to rallying only, and people still use Nebu in the field all the time. In fact, I've used Zhuge Liang Nebu in the field and been crushing people with some of my very best reports with area of effect damage. So if the combo's good with Nebu, it's going to be even better with Ashurbanipal. Now, in terms of some of the most obvious pairings, we've looked at Herman Prime's kit with Poison already, and the synergy with extra skill activations is pretty compelling. You could use Herman Prime and Ashurbanipal together, depending on your philosophy for mitigating damage or dealing damage. You would want Herman Prime to be the primary to mitigate more damage. You would want Ashurbanipal to be the primary for the skill tree to generate more rage and thus do more damage. You could pair with Zhuge Liang, and I think that's a rally a lot of people are going to use, right? Ton of damage mitigation, archer health. There's a lot to like about Zhuge Liang and Ashurbanipal, both in the field and as a rally. I think that if you're on territory, that would be a little awkward defensively. You're going to have 0 march speed. So that is definitely, I would say, uncomfortable for me about that aspect of that combo. I think a pairing with Boudica Prime, it's obviously going to be really good. Ashurbanipal, Boudica Prime. She's got a lot of single target punch and goodness and sort of sustain as well, that the combination I think will do great together. But the commander that I constantly compared to here is Nebu, right? So Nebu does 1500 damage factor to 5 enemies in a fan-shaped area. Oh, wait. And he does 500 extra damage to the main target. Okay, well, you see why I made this comparison? So Ashurbanipal does 1000 damage to the main target. Instead of 30% defense and 15% march speed, you have 20% attack and a conditional 20% defense and 15% march speed. As I mentioned, this skill is 100% about rallying. This skill makes it so that you do 15% more damage, and when you launch a basic attack, you have a 10% chance to reduce the target's rage. Rage reduction effects are really good. So instead of this, right, you have the 20% normal attack damage, and no, I think it's 20% skill damage, 15% less normal attack damage taken. In some ways, this aspect of Nebu is better, but then the main difference is, look, at the end of the day, you're getting 500 more damage factor than Nebu. That's pretty good. And you have a full expertise of value above what Nebu does, right? Nebu's expertise is already accounted for in this active skill. Whereas Ashurbanipal, look, he's got that expertise skill that's going to give you sort of periodically some really major buffs. So he's Nebu 2.0, like 100%. And he seems really good. So I would say, literally, if you would have used Nebu in your lineup, do the swap out for Ash if you are going to work on him. Now, that's kind of an interesting question. Like, should you work on him? And before I get to that, just 1 second, we cover the talents, okay? These are pretty uncontroversial. Like, these are the talents you use if you're fielding. You could do something with the Conquering Tree for rallying. That is a thing. I've probably got a Conquering build here that I've used in the past, right? So if you were going with a full rally build, you could skip out on all the extra rage, which is debatable, and go for this configuration on a rally build. I think this would be reasonable, and honestly, before I say definitively, oh yeah, this is where it's at, like I'd really want to test this to confirm. And the alternative is you say, you know what, I really don't care about the Conquering Tree as much. I'd rather have the extra skill damage, in which case you would run this build over here. These are all tried and true Nebu builds. This is like not controversial. These have been done before. The only question is, with Ashurbanipal's kit and whoever you pair with, will you get the best result with which of these builds? And we're going to have to test to ultimately go and figure that out. If I were placing my bets, I would say that probably the full archer tree is the way to go. And I really don't care about the counterattack all that much these days. Like if I was multi-rallying and maybe all I was taking was counterattack damage, then I'd really be interested in the buckler shield. But I would be inclined to believe that this is probably the better build. But I could be wrong. We'll test and figure that out. Subscribe if you haven't already, because pretty much, in fact, for the last couple years, I feel like, every single time a commander comes into the game, we live stream the testing of that commander in a rally context and often in a field context as well. So this brings us back to the archer pairs, baby. And like, we've got to do some testing to figure that out. But if I had to make my predictions, I would say if you're bringing one archer march, your best archer march is going to be Hermann Prime with Zhuge Liang. If you are bringing 2 archer marches, now you start to have some flexibility. You could do Boudica Prime with Zhuge Liang, and depending on how you're configured, you could then run Hermann Prime with Ashurbanipal. I think that would be super reasonable. You also could run Hermann Prime with Tommy and not have to invest in a new commander. But there's a difference there. The Tommy's really good at melting targets, and you go target by target, and if you have 7 marches, then like, that's probably going to be the way to go because of how many marches you're amplifying the damage for. But most people don't have 7 marches. So like, bro, be relatable. Well, the answer there is you probably just use archers you've already got. Like, Ashurbanipal is a rally commander. And if you've only got the sculptures for one of the 2 commanders, I think the Hermann Prime is still the pick. He only hits 3 targets with Hermann Prime, but the debuff's really good. And overall, I would say Hermann Prime is more oriented toward being a universally good fielding commander. Ashurbanipal is missing a few things to be a great field commander, right? He's missing a debuff, which means that your ball's not getting really amplified by virtue of his presence. He's just a stat stick, which is fine. There's value in that. I mean, Henry gets used all the time, and he's kind of just a stat stick, unless you're hitting a garrison, right? So I think that if you can only invest in one, I still think Hermann Prime is the pick. So that's the important thing if you're figuring out where your investments go. And, you know, you try to spin that wheel as much as you can. Another pair that, like, obviously is going to work with Ashurbanipal is going to be Henry. And I haven't talked about him, but he is an outstanding commander and has honestly surpassed my expectations for what he could get done. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case. A part is that the support tree is really good. A part is that this debuff is really amazing if you're hitting garrisons, making them take more skill damage. But generally speaking, he's just really survivable, but does really great single target damage, which means you can really wreck whatever you're hitting or sustain well. And that applies also to being in the field. He's got really good sustain. For 5 seconds, you take less skill damage. And so when you combine the 2, I mean, like, I don't know, I guess it's going to depend a lot on who you're rallying, right? Like, if you're rallying Gorgo, then you're not going to want to use Henry. Gorgo doesn't do skill damage, bro. She does smite damage. So, depending on who you're up against, you're either going to use Henry and enjoy the skill damage mitigation, which works great in the field, or you're going to skip out on this entirely, and you might consider, honestly, like, I think either Zhuge Liang or Herman Prime is going to end up being the rally combo. But, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Overall, I'm very hyped for this commander's release into the game. He seems pretty balanced to me as far as new commanders that are designed for rallying goes. Like, he's not so busted that, you gotta use him in the field, but he is like a Nebu 2.0. So if you would use Nebu, which I am right now, then like I would upgrade from that. I mean, gosh, am I still going to be using Nebu though after Herman Prime arrives? I don't think I would be. I'm either going to be using Tommy or I'm going to be maxing both commanders and use Ash, right? Like my 2-March combo in an ideal world would probably be Boudica, Zhuge Liang, and then Herman Prime and Ashurbanipal or Tommy. So I don't know that in my 2-March Archer lineup I've got space for it. A 3-March Archer lineup, though, like, you were probably using Nebu, and, like, you definitely use Ashurbanipal. So anyways, I've covered this enough. Throw a like on here. Consider subscribing. You don't want to miss out on the testing as soon as it's in-game, so subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you want to see the videos on Herman Prime, in case you missed those, card will be in the end screen in just a second. Definitely check those out. You need to prep for Herman Prime. He's going to be very good.